So this chapter is on international trade. Okay, so all done with attendance. Let me put last round. Okay. All right. Any issues with attendance, I will help you guys later on. Okay. So let me come on to the class first. So it's all done with captions as well. So it could help with the understanding. So chapter 4 today is on international trade. Right. So we're going to talk about free trade. We're going to talk about protectionism. We're going to talk about some theories behind why countries should even trade in the first place. So this is a rough outline. Again, this is looking at the whole macro environment, looking at the trade policies that the countries are practicing. A very stark contrast. Okay, so a simple one. If you look at the case of Singapore versus, let's say, US. So let's say if we backtrack a few years ago, looking at US under Trump presidency, right, you would have recalled around 2019, 2018, right, around that period, we had the trade war, right? So it started with US imposing tariffs or taxes on US Chinese imports. So whenever Chinese firms sold to the US or they exported to US, they will have to pay a tax. So this has certain effects, right? So we'll explain later. So that would be considered as a form of protectionism, all right? Because we are trying to restrict imports, we are trying to protect our own industries, right? We don't want to buy so much from other countries. At the same time, if you contrast the situation with Singapore, Singapore has always been practicing free trade, right? It doesn't restrict with which country it trades with. In fact, it is always constantly on the lookout for new trade partners, looking at people to invest in Singapore, right? Looking at firms to invite in to set up here so that there are more jobs created and so on. So one is a very open economy, right? Like Singapore, it is very open. It's inviting more and more trade partners. Whereas on the other hand, right, you have the case with US that is trying to limit the imports. Okay, so it has different considerations, different reasons, all right? So we'll talk about those later on as we move along. All right, so let's move on here. Okay, so again, for those who just joined in attendance, you just type in your name in the chat box. All right, later during the break, I'll just edit for you. Okay, so we don't break the flow. Okay, so first one, the key concept here is about the idea of comparative advantage and also absolute advantage. All right, so these two are quite commonly explained together. All right, so we have comparative advantage and also absolute advantage. Let's say we come to absolute first. This one should be easier to understand, a bit more intuitive. So it says that, for example, if a country can produce 10 units of a product with fewer resources compared to B, then A has an absolute advantage in producing that product. This one's straightforward. Both of us, right, we are both countries, A and B, we can produce t-shirts. Let's say to produce 5,000 t-shirts. Country A uses 200 kg of cotton, for example. Country B uses 400 kg of cotton. So both produce the same types of t-shirt. One uses 200 kg of cotton, right, the raw material. The other one uses 400 kg of cotton. So in that case, the country that uses less resources is said to have an absolute advantage. So with this, what is the implication? If we follow this theory, what it suggests is that if we can use less resources, that means our cost is lower, right? Producing the same volume of output, but using less resources and possibly less labor or even less machineries as well, because you don't have to process so much cotton, then you're going to incur lower cost. And lower cost is good because if we link to economics, it's to do with efficiency. It's to do with charging lower prices to the consumers. So then in that case, consumers will be happy and they will buy more, right? And it benefits everyone because we are here to boost efficiency. So then the country that can use less resources will be the one selling. Okay, you can follow the idea. So the country that is producing using less resources should be the one producing and then selling. So country B, in terms of cotton, right, producing 5,000 units, it uses 400 kg of cotton. So in that case, maybe it can consider trading something else, or it can consider producing and selling something else. Because in terms of clothing, it doesn't have absolute advantage. So if you still go ahead and produce, it's going to have more cost. It's going to incur higher prices and it's not going to benefit anyone because your costs are much higher. So that's one idea with absolute advantage. So that's one side. On the other hand, if you still look at the resources, the cost, we think of it in another perspective. This is in terms of your opportunity cost. Okay, so let me just highlight here, right? So with absolute advantage, it is whether or it is about which country uses less resources to produce the same volume of output. And because if you use less, it is cheaper, you should be producing and selling to the whole world. All right, so you produce and sell what you are good at, all right? So that is efficient. So you shouldn't be doing everything yourself. Coming back, let's say we are not looking at those with attendance, just type in your name later during the break. I will help you to take attendance. No worries. So comparative advantage, it is looking at the opportunity cost. Okay, so it's not about whether you have used or you are using the least resources, but whether comparing, let's say, two products that you can produce, right? Let's say today I can produce t-shirts and I can produce shoes. Okay, I can produce t-shirts and I can produce shoes. So when I produce these two types of items, I will be using labor. I'll be using raw materials. I'll be using machineries, which are capital goods, right? So the same resources, let's say labor and machineries, raw materials maybe differ a bit, all right? But let's say now generally by and large, the resources used are the same. Then we have to decide, are we producing t-shirts or are we producing shoes, right? Now, with comparative advantage, it is saying that if you can produce the one with the lower opportunity cost, then you should produce and sell that item. Okay, one more time. If you can produce incurring a lower opportunity cost, then you should produce and sell to the world. All right, so that's how we trade. So what does it mean here? Now, let's say, for example, okay, they give the example here already. So country A produces both wine and cloth more efficiently than country B. However, country A is relatively better at producing wine, while country B is relatively better at producing cloth. So country A should specialize in wine, B in cloth, leading to mutual benefits. So what it's saying here is, first of all, the first statement, the first condition, country A is producing wine and cloth more efficiently. That means it is using less resources compared to B to produce wine and cloth. Okay, again, let's say country A, right? It only uses 10 kg of wine, 10 kg of cloth, 10 kg of, let's say, grapes, okay, and 10 kg of cotton to produce 20 kg of wine and 20 kg of cloth. All right, so let me just type in here. So for instance, we have country A uses 10 kg of grapes. Okay, I assume it's grapes. All right, I'm not familiar with whatever resources. So let's say grapes and cotton to produce, let's say, 20 kg of wine and cloth or clothes. Okay, then country B, it uses, let's say, 40 kg. All right, now this is what statement A says. So A produces both wine and cloth more efficiently than country B. That means both countries are producing 20 kg of wine and clothes, 20 kg of wine and clothes, but A is using less resources for both types of output. All right, it is using less resources compared to B to produce both types of output. So in that case, we can say that country A has absolute advantage in producing both types of products, which is wine and clothes. Now you can understand, huh? So country A has absolute advantage in producing both wine and clothes. However, if you look at the theory of comparative advantage, then it's further going down. It's looking at which product are you producing more efficiently. So let's say here for country A, between wine and clothes, it is producing wine even more efficiently. Whereas for B, even though it is using more resources, it is better at producing clothes compared to wine. So then in that case, for both countries, because they have their own specialization, they should actually trade. All right, they should actually trade. So looking at this, they may contradict a bit because second one, absolute advantage, says that if you are using less resources, then you should just trade that resource. Or if you're using less resources, you should just produce the item and sell it to the world, right? But first one, comparative advantage, says that it should only be considering the opportunity cost. That means even if you can produce everything using less resources than your neighboring countries, you should still specialize and then sell them. Okay? So you shouldn't be producing everything yourself because that is simply not efficient, right? You cannot be a master of everything, right? You may be a master of some products, but you would not be efficient in producing all the products, right? So that gives rise to why we need to trade. Okay, so those are some of the theories explaining why you need to trade. So like for example, in Japan, right? Let's say in Germany, okay, for example. So Germany is a country that is known for producing cars, right? Or let's say Japan as well. So you have some of these countries that specialize in producing some types of cars. So then we wonder, even in these industries, right, in these countries, they are very good at producing cars. Okay, like European, you have like Mercedes, BMW, right? I'm not a car person, okay? I'm just roughly saying. And then let's say for Japan, you have Nissan, Honda, right? So why is it that these countries are still importing cars? Okay, if you think about it, right? Here we say that with comparative advantage, it leads to trade. Then now the question is, some countries are doing quite well in cars. Like Singapore doesn't really have a car brand, right? So it buys from other countries. That one is okay, right? Easy to understand. But like countries like Japan, like the European countries, they produce cars, right? They have their own brands. They are very well known all over the world. Why are they still importing cars? Like Japan, Nissan, Honda, right? Why are they still importing BMW, Porsche, and so on? Because then, first thing, it gives rise to more variety. So it gives rise to more variety. So consumers have more options to choose. We are not limited to that few of that options, right? Even in that same country, what you are producing, we are not limited by that few brands, right? We can buy from overseas as well. And then also at the same time, you have better technology. It may be something that the consumers want, right? Like let's say the certain brands, right? They are more of a sports car, so it can go very fast. It may be a smaller, more compact size. Some of the brands they pride themselves on, let's say, the stability, right? If I'm not sure, like SUVs probably. So it's more stable. It doesn't overturn that easily. You can go on more rugged terrains. So all these are different functions, different types of specialization, right? Even within a specific product such as cars. Okay, so by trading, we are able to actually leverage on each other's specialization on your skills, and we can provide more things to the consumers. Okay, all right. Anything, feel free to let me know, huh? Okay, so let's move on. So here, these are just some theories to explain, all right? So again, for your research, some of you guys are already finished, so you may not be considering all these theories further, right? Because it's mostly done. But for the purpose of the exam, right, please do read through because these are theories that we can use to contrast, right? The question can ask us to compare and contrast the different theories. They can ask you to explain first and see which are the differences and similarities between them, and also asking you for your opinions on what you think about them. Okay, so don't just skip through, huh? So you can read and then you can find examples. You can even research deeper, right, to see what other points there are about the theories. Okay, all right, so number three here, the factor proportions theory says that countries will export goods that use their abundant and cheap factors of production. So that's one portion. Second one, to import goods that require factors that are scarce domestically. Okay, so here, right, this is again playing to your strength. all right? But it again looks at a different dimension. So first thing, right, why are we focusing on using resources that you have a lot of, right? Let's say Malaysia, right? Malaysia, they have petroleum. The Middle Eastern countries, they have petroleum. Singapore doesn't have anything, right? So if you contrast this, then why is it that countries that have this abundance of factors of production, whatever they are, whether it's capital goods, labor, natural resources, why should they produce using this and import other products that are using factors of production or resources that we don't have so much of? And so one thing is because of the price. So when you have an abundance of something, there will be a very high supply of it. Like today, let's say I am selling, let's say right now, right? Let's say right now we are selling face masks. Okay, so there is nothing different. Suppose now more and more firms suddenly start coming in to sell face masks. All right, they just keep producing, producing. Then what is going to happen is the price of the face mask will fall, right? Those who did economics. So with higher supply, the price will fall. So then coming back here, right, there is no increase in supply of your resources, right? It simply is that between country A and B, country A has an abundance of the resources. So it has a lot of petroleum, like Malaysia, Middle Eastern countries. Then in Singapore's case, it has a lot of, let's say, high-skilled talents, high-skilled labor. That's what we have the most, the labor. So then we make use of these resources that we sort of specialize in, right? We are endowed with. And also because there's so much, the cost to the country would be lower. And compared to another country with a scarcity of such resources, they will find it more expensive to produce using these resources because to them, these resources could be very expensive. Right? If you think about it, right? Today, let's say let's say in Singapore, okay, let's just contrast. Let's say in Singapore, we have a lot of people who are educated, easily get a degree, right? Whether in public or like public universities or private institutions. So if I graduate with a law degree, for example, right, and I want to work as a lawyer, in Singapore's context, right, there could be a high supply of lawyer because every year many graduates, right, finish their law degree and they go for the bar exam, right? They become a lawyer. So in terms of wages, it wouldn't be that high. Of course, it's high, right? Relatively, it's high. But let's say it wouldn't be very, very high. In contrast, right, let's say now you are in a developing country, okay? And suppose the conditions, everything is, let's say, the same, right? It's all the same. The only difference is because in those countries, there are not so many law graduates, and you are one of the few with those specialized knowledge, right? And let's say you open a law firm, you work in a law firm. This law firm is one of the few in the whole nation, in the whole country. So your business is going to be super, super in abundance, right? You're going to earn a lot because people will just keep coming to you since there are not many other lawyers to choose from. So your wages, your salary will be very high. By the same token, resources that are in abundance, it will be cheaper to the country, whereas resources that are in scarcity will be more expensive to that country. So make use of what you have, and these resources are something that you are blessed with and that is probably cheaper. So then use those, produce the items that you can with these resources, and you trade with other countries. Okay, so again, these are the theories that support free trade, right? So we look at free trade and we see that, okay, so these theories support, so we should have free trade, all right? Okay, then the next one here, the product life cycle theory. So it says how the products will go through 3 stages. So you can see introduction, new products are developed and produced domestically. Then second stage, they lump the growth and maturity together. So imagine now, let's say sales, right? How we think about this is, let's say we have sales level. When you first launch a product, right? This is in the introduction stage. So the sales level is starting to pick up slowly, right? People start to know your product. People start to consider your product, right? And they are still a bit not so familiar with your product. Okay, so that's stage 1. Second stage is your sales will gain more traction. So it keeps going up, going up, going up. Maturity is probably where it sort of reaches the peak. Okay, so it reaches the peak. So as demand increases, production expands, possibly to other countries. possibly to other countries. Standardization, production becomes more cost efficient. It often relocates to low-cost nations. So this theory here says that the products usually go through these stages, and with that, it will be dependent or it will require the assistance of other nations. So here is not focusing so much on buying and selling, but more about producing. If we follow this theory, then it say that ultimately, right, when the sales level are quite high, right, let's say Apple. Apple sells to different countries, right? And we know that, let's say from last week's video, we saw that the supply chain is very globalized. So it gets the raw materials from another part of the world, and then they will get the resource, they will, let's say, refine, they will go through the production process in another part of the world before the let's say the completed iPhones are then sold to people around the world, right? So we can produce in country A, or let's say we can produce in China, produce in Vietnam, Mexico, Brazil, before we sell to consumers all over the world. So in that case, because of this, let's say the low cost. So at this stage, we want to pursue cost efficiency. We want to find the cheapest factors of production, resources. Therefore, there is a need to go for cheaper countries and then try to reduce your cost to increase the profits. Okay, so just to sum up, so these four theories, again, when you are revising for exam, pay more attention to this. We have to explain how they work. Okay, so what is comparative advantage? What is absolute advantage? What is this factor proportions theory? What is this product life cycle theory? So we have to understand and explain what they are. Then further down, we have to also discuss, we have to compare and contrast between these theories. So they may ask you, let's say the question could ask like in terms of the perspective, right? Like they could ask you to contrast between the absolute advantage and also the comparative advantage. How are they similar? How are they different? Okay, and let's say now there is a different outcome, right? When you use these theories, there's a different outcome. Then how do you decide whether to trade or not to trade? Okay, like this one here, right? Country A is more efficient at wine and cloth, so it has absolute advantage for both. Then is it still able to trade? Does it still benefit from trading with other countries? All right, so this would be roughly the theories needed to explain why free trade is actually promoted, free trade is actually supported. Okay, so any questions you have, just let me know up to now so far. Now on the other side, right, with free trade, we also have the counter against it. This is the trade protectionism. So we are using policies such as tariffs, quotas, and some others to restrict the amount of imports. So with free trade, the country is very open. It's inviting firms to come in. It's inviting businesses to set up. Like you see the whole environment in Singapore. Okay, so first thing is, it is very dependent on exports for economic growth, for the national income, because we don't have enough resources. People don't spend that aggressively, right? Because with the Asian culture, right, they advocate saving. So you wouldn't have parents telling the children to spend every single cent they earn, right? So from young, they are taught to save. So whatever we earn, we already save a portion of it. But because we save, we don't spend so aggressively, right? It will limit the firm's profits. Okay, so to some extent, it will limit the firm's profitability because people don't spend every single cent they earn. So say the household spending is limited. The firms, right, may also not spend as much because here they see that people don't spend everything they have, right? So the spending is still kept. So firms will spend on machineries, but also to some extent. And then also the government, right? Government here is very conservative. So it also doesn't spend aggressively like on a day-to-day basis. So how then are we going to grow the economy to generate revenue for the firms, right? And the people. And that is through exports. Okay, so in Singapore's case, export is very important. We don't restrict exports, right? We depend on it heavily. So we invite firms to come in, right? Like we look at, let's say, the corporate tax percentage. I think we went through, right? So corporate tax percentage is about 17%. It's quite low, on the lower end. And that will attract firms, right, looking to save on paying the income tax, right, to actually choose Singapore. Okay, so that would be the argument for free trade. Then whereas on the other hand, for trade protectionism, right, look at the case of US. Okay, so US, first thing is because 2/3 of the economy, it is generated from consumption spending. So today, if US just closes itself, it stops all forms of cooperation with interaction with all other countries, right? It just shuts its borders and then, okay, bye, and then you never hear from me, never see me. Technically, right, it can still generate about 70% of what it is currently generating in terms of economic growth because the people spend more, right? And you have a larger population. So with that as your context, right? US is able to, let's say, punish, or is, let's say, it's able to impose policies like tariffs to restrict imports because it doesn't depend that heavily. It's not something that important to them, so they can choose to go without. Okay, so trade protectionism, that is one. On the other hand, right, other reasons for trade protectionism would be things like, let's say, to protect your own industries. Okay, so let's say one example, right? Let's say national defense. Okay, let's say national defense. National defense, this could be, let's say, selling weapons, producing weapons, the defense technology, and so on. So certain countries, right, not only they may actually impose policies, right, that restrict the sales of such technology because it is critical to your national defense. We are able to produce these special type of weapons, but the law states that we cannot sell to other countries because then every other country has the same weapons, right? Then we are not at a more superior position. So that would be one consideration. Another point could be that your industry is what we call a sunset sunrise industry. Okay, let me give the example. So we have sunset. Okay, so sunset, if you imagine the actual sunset, right? The sun is actually setting, right? So it's going to be nighttime soon, right? So these are the industries that are like dying. It's not able to withstand competition. It could just be decimated or just collapse very fast. Then on the other hand, sunrise industry could be industries that is starting to rise. Okay, so again, think about sunrise, right? The sun is slowly rising, so it's slowly turning to daytime. But at this stage, it's sort of like still a baby, right? You need time for it to grow. It needs time to be able to develop. Okay, so this kind of industry, right? This kind of industry, they need protection. Okay, because if they have more competition from foreigners, then the government will see that, oh, there will be higher unemployment, there will be more industries shutting down because these industries are facing extreme competition. Okay, so with that, the governments will have to step in, they impose certain policies, they don't let foreign firms come in to sell because we have to protect our own local industry. All right, so these are some of the considerations. Okay, so what trade protectionism policies are there? All right, so again here there are a few policies that are actually mentioned. These are not the exhaustive list. There are more than these few, but feel free to actually read around, right, to get more information, to get more examples yourself. Okay, here just giving you some ideas. All right. So the first one will be tariffs. Okay, so tariff, this is basically a tax. All right. So we impose a tax, and what happens is the government is going to collect the tax revenue from the foreign firms. So using the example of US, China, right? Chinese firms, right? They had to pay the taxes or the tariffs to the US government whenever they sold to US consumers. Okay, so how the tariffs work is essentially, right, why people are buying from the international market. Why is it that I want to buy from overseas? Is probably because it is cheaper. Right? So the first concern will probably be the price. Let's say if you ask me personally, right, my personal example, let's say 6-7 years ago, right, when I used to go let's say Seoul, South Korea very frequently, then we'll buy the let's say the facial products because apart from the experience, it's also like it's also cheaper to buy there, right, from the place, right, where the shops originated from. Okay, so we don't have to pay things like extra levies, taxes, extra costs, right, extra markups in Singapore, right? So I just go to Korea and I just buy. And let's say, for example, I go to Thailand, right? I just want something cheap to wear, my t-shirt, singlets, or even any attire, right? So if you go there to buy such clothing, right, it is cheaper than buying Singapore stores. So then we'll go overseas to buy these specific items, right? So it is because of a lower price of the foreign products. That's why the consumers buy from overseas. So then the effect of a tariff is that it will raise the price because now the foreign firms have to pay an extra cost to the government, right? Because now they have to bear a tax. So the additional tax is a higher cost to the government, paid to the government. So the firms have to pass on to someone. Last time without tax, I can charge you $5 for this t-shirt if I export from, let's say, China to Singapore, right? So it can sell at $5. Now, because I need to pay the government $2 per t-shirt, I cannot just absorb the $2 myself, right? It cannot be that I sell to Singaporean consumers, I make a loss, right? So they must help me to recover these losses or this extra cost. So then we will raise the price. So the Chinese firms can charge, let's say, $6, $7, or even more, right? And now, as a Singaporean consumer, right, last time the t-shirts I buy from China, $5. Now it costs me $6, $7, $8. So there is a higher price attached. Then I wouldn't buy as many pieces from the Chinese firms, right? Because it's no longer that attractive in terms of the pricing. So it will restrict the imports in that manner. So why do this? Why is it that we want to do this? So in US case, it was saying, right, it was accusing China of selling too much to them. So what happened was the previous US president, right, Donald Trump, so he said that the Chinese government, the Chinese firms, they were selling too much to US. So when we sell too much, right, compared to what they were buying from US, they were earning a lot from the US consumers, but they didn't buy as much from US. So they didn't spend a lot on the US products, but they sold a lot to the US consumers, and that caused the US to be bleeding money. Right? We buy and buy your products, we spend so much money, but you didn't buy as much from us. So that led to a problem called a trade deficit. Right? So overall, US was spending more than what it was earning from China. So then the president got upset and he said, okay, right, time to stop. So we're going to impose a tariff, and that will help the government collect the tax revenue. At the same time, we will restrict the imports because now everything from China sold in US will be more expensive. So then as a result, we are not going to buy as much given that it's more expensive. Okay, so it will restrict the trade. Then as a firm, right, as a firm producing in countries like China, right? So China, you have many firms based base their production there. So what did they have to do, right? So you have to scramble to find an alternative location. So you may not want to continue paying the taxes because it's very expensive. It cuts into your profits. So they had to relocate. Right? So relocated to, let's say, other countries like Vietnam, Mexico, Brazil, where you still have some sort of a cheaper labor. Because at the same time in China, right, I think the wages was also going up because like more and more people got educated, right? So you have more high-skilled labor compared to the low-skilled labor. In contrast, an economy like Vietnam, right, which is different from the rest of developed countries, they are usually like aging populations, right? You have more older people and people are not giving birth as much. So the older people are getting more and more, whereas the younger people, right, are getting fewer and fewer because people are just not giving birth, right? In contrast, let's say with Vietnam, right, they are giving birth more. So in terms of the population, there's a large proportion or there's a larger proportion of the younger people. So more people looking for jobs, right? It is also easier to find workers to, let's say, produce the same items. Okay, so then as a result, they relocated to other countries, right, that wouldn't have to pay the tariffs. Okay, so these are some of the considerations, right? On the other hand, right, let's say for some countries that realize that they no longer want to be so vulnerable, right, to global events. So let's say I'm a Japanese company, right, and I'm producing in China. Now, because of the argument, the disputes between US and China, they have to bear the consequences. To the Japanese firm, for example, this is something between US and China, right? But because I base my production in China, it now comes off as a Chinese manufactured product. So US will tax these items. So sort of like for no reason, for a reason that doesn't seem to make sense, right? They have to pay the extra taxes. So if we don't want to be so vulnerable to such events, right, want to take more control, then there is also another theme, right, another concept called reshoring. Okay, so let me just type here. Okay, so there is also another concept of the reshoring. So reshoring, that means your production, your part of the supply chain was based overseas previously, and now you want to bring it back home. So we bring it back home, it comes back to your own country, and it will become more insulated, right? More insulated from, let's say, these global events. Because now whatever happens to us, right, let's say our production, it could be based just on the Japanese events, right? It wouldn't be based on what happened between US and Japan. It wouldn't be based on whatever happened in other countries, right? It could be due to natural disaster. It could be due to government policies, right? The more countries you involve in your supply chain, you could also be more vulnerable because anything happening in the world could easily affect you, right? So that is something that some firms were looking at because they had a chance to rethink whether they want to globalize or they actually want to carry out this trend of deglobalization. That means everything going back to your own country, right, and relying less on the foreign countries. Okay, so yeah, anyway, I digress a bit. So here, this is the first part on tariff. Second form of trade protectionism is on quotas. All right, so quotas here, it is to do with limiting the quantity of the product that can be imported into a country. Okay, so the first one, we didn't explicitly restrict the quantity. Okay, it's only about imposing a higher tax. That's all, or imposing a new tax, right? Depending on whether we already had an existing tariff. So we raise what we charge to the firms, the government collects it, and whether the people really do buy less or not, right? That's another thing. Okay, but in terms of the quantity of imports, it's likely, not definite, it's likely to reduce. On the other hand, with quotas, right, we already restrict the import quantity explicitly. Okay, so it could be about the quantity itself. That means we say, okay, only 5,000 units can come in, right? That's about quantity. Another form could be in terms of value. So we can say, on the other hand, like, oh, we only allow $5,000 worth of imports into our country. So the first form is 5,000 units. Second form is $5,000 worth of imports, right? So they can make such variation. So the difference between both is that here, the government is going to collect the revenue, right? So with tariffs, the government will collect some money. So it's in a way good thing. Quotas, the government doesn't collect any money, okay? So they may lose out in this aspect, right? Because there's no money that is flowing to the government, okay? So that's one. In terms of similarity, for both tariffs and quotas, because the imports will become less, it will encourage the local firms to produce more. Because very often, the motive, the reason for actually imposing such policies is to protect your own industry, right? That's usually like the main reason, to protect your own country, your own industries. So once the imports are limited, the local firms will be able to produce and produce and produce more than before because consumers still need to buy, right? They still need to buy. So even though they may not prefer to buy from local brands because it's more expensive, now they look at the foreign brands, either it is also more expensive because of the tariffs, or the government has already restricted how many units to come in. But if we still need to use, then no choice. We have to buy from the local firms. So you allow the local firms to continue producing and produce even more than before. So that would be for tariffs and quotas. Now the third one here is subsidies. But the subsidies are given by the foreign firms. Okay, it's given by the foreign firms. So what happens is whenever the firm sells overseas, the government will provide a subsidy. All right, so let's say now I produce cars, okay? I can sell to my own the consumers in my own country, right? Let's say country A, I can also sell to country B. If I sell to country B, the government provides me a subsidy. If I sell to consumers in country A, I don't receive such subsidies. So if all else the same, then where am I going to sell to? Do I choose A or do I choose B? Probably the firm will choose B, right? Because selling overseas will allow them to receive the subsidies. So it effectively lowers their cost of production and they can actually make more money. Oh yeah, someone okay, question, yes.
Where in overseas, or where to sell, or what to sell in overseas, sir?
Again, sorry.
Where in overseas, and what are we gonna sell in overseas?
Where in overseas and what are we selling overseas?
Yes.
Okay, where in overseas that other specific other markets lor. So as long as it's not your own country, then that will be considered overseas. Then what we're selling depends on the specific items. Like let's say looking at my example, I'll be selling cars. And then I can choose between selling to my own people or selling to foreigners. So if I sell to foreigners, the government will give me subsidies. So I may prefer to sell more to the foreigners. Okay, I answer your question, huh? Okay, all right. So, okay, what was I saying? Okay. So then, right, what happened is now the foreigners will be buying more of my products. So I'm the car producer, so I'm selling either to my own country or I'm selling to foreigners, people who drive my cars. So if I sell foreigners, first benefit I get is that I'll receive the subsidies, right? Because my own government gives me subsidies. And why did my government give me that? Because it wants to promote exports. So my government will subsidize my cars when I sell overseas. And because I receive the subsidies, right, I am in the position to lower my price. So I can offer discounts to foreigners because I have subsidies to offset my cost. And also I want them to buy more, right? So we give discounts, we lower the price, foreigners will buy more from us, and then we will keep selling, keep selling, keep selling. So in this case, right, we are promoting the exports of the products. Okay, we are promoting the exports of the products. So the next thing to do, right, is how can we actually drive out the foreign firms? So I'm selling cars, right? I want to sell more to foreigners. That's my first step. Second thing I want to do is maybe I have bigger ambitions. I want to dominate the foreign markets. I want to go to, for example, I want to go to Singapore. I want to go to Malaysia. I want to go to any country, right, around the world, and I want the consumers to only be buying from me. Okay, so what can I do, right? Lower my price and I lower to the point where the local firms cannot compete. So let's say today, right, you are in the market to buy a car. Honda, right? Let's say in Singapore's pricing, Singapore's cars are more expensive. Let's say in Honda, right? A brand new Honda, if you buy at the road show around there, it will cost about $70,000, right? For a normal Honda car, first hand, brand new, with some additional taxes, etc. included. Okay, so think of it as around $70,000, right, for a brand new Honda in Singapore. If you want something similar quality, you buy from, let's say buy from me, right, my car brand, it will only cost you $20,000 for the same quality. Which one will you choose? Let's say you're not very brand conscious, right? You don't have a strong loyalty to Honda. Okay. Yeah, okay. So let's say the quality is about the same. You're just here to see which is cheaper, right? And then the functions are all there. Okay. And moreover, I would argue like maybe you beg to differ, but I would argue like let's say someone buying a Honda wouldn't be going after the brand, right? It's more like looking at the functions and so on. If you're really buying a brand, then probably you're considering like the more high end, like BMWs, Rolls Royce, Porsche, right? Probably. So then these consumers are probably more price sensitive. So then when we sell, let's say I sell my cars to them, right? Let's say I come to Singapore and sell, then wow, right? 20,000 and 70,000. Of course, people will buy from me, right? And sooner or later, I'll drive out all the other brands in the market because my cars are the cheapest. Okay, so that will prompt Singapore, hypothetically, okay, assuming I'm not a Singaporean, I own a car company and I produce and sell. And let's say now the Singapore government comes in and they say, okay, enough, right? This is considered unethical, to some extent illegal, and you should stop. But you cannot just order me to stop. All right. So what they can do is they could, let's say, put a restriction. So it could be in terms of a quota. It could be in terms of, let's say, a tariff, right? Because my prices are super low because I receive subsidies from my own government. So then the Singapore government can impose taxes to tax me. That will make my prices go back to, let's say, $60,000-$70,000, same as Honda. Okay, so you get my point now. So here, right, what I just described is this practice called the dumping practice. Okay, so here, let me just, okay, you can go and search, all right? Some of these terms we mentioned, you can go and search. So dumping, this is as a trade practice. Okay, so some firms, right, they charge a very low price when they sell in the foreign markets. So when they charge a very low price, this will sooner or later drive out the local companies. Okay, then later on, when all these local companies shut down, then this foreign firm can actually dominate and start to increase their prices, because now you are like the only one or two firms left, right? So your market share is very high. Your ability to set your own prices also very high because there's practically not much or no competition left. Okay, so that's in a way that's quite scary lah. So if you go search the news, you will see like sometimes the countries will accuse their trade partners of practicing dumping. All right, that means they charge at a very low price, even at a price below cost. That means, right, in the beginning, in the earlier stages, these firms are able to take the loss. I produce using $5, I sell to you for only $2. Every unit I sell, I start to bleed more money. I make more losses, but I have the ability to drive away the competition. So for now, I may be bleeding money, but once the competition is out, I can start to increase the price and earn back 2 times, 3 times. Okay, so that will prompt the government to take action to restrict this because, in a sense, it's not a healthy competition, right? It's more like resorting to such underhanded methods. So you will find articles that claim or that accuse, right, some trade partner countries of doing that. But whether yes or no, of course, they will say no. Like they will say, no, 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 I didn't do that. But it's very hard to say accurately, precisely whether they did or not, right? It's just one country's words against another country. This next part, okay, the rest I can continue after break now. So just to sum up, so we talked about free trade, the reasons for promoting free trade. We also talked about trade protectionism, some ways to restrict trade, right? So we also looked at how some firms could be affected by these theories. So if it's a country that's practicing free trade, that means you have more competition. That means you may be able to differentiate yourself. Your items can provide more variety for the consumers. Then this will help, right, for the firms to sell and to also offer to more consumers. On the other hand, let's say we talk about trade protectionism, it's about restricting imports. What are the reasons for this? There are many, right? If you look at the US-China tariff case, that is one, right, where US was complaining about China. And the impact, right, is that firms may have to relocate, whether to another country to produce, or whether they have to raise the prices for the US consumers, or let's say they relocate the production base back to their own country so that they restrict the impact of the global supply chain. Globalization, why trade is important, why it works. Second portion, we looked at some of the reasons, such as protecting your own industry, such as providing jobs to your workers, such as, let's say, certain sunrise, sunset industries. We also looked at reasons such as, let's say, preventing yourself getting bullied, right? We don't want other countries to be practicing dumping on us. So in that case, we would have to impose the policies on them. So these will be some of the points from just now. So let's say now we want to take a step further. We also want to cooperate even more. All right, we want to cooperate even more as well. So then they can actually enter into this thing called the trade agreements. So we see the different layers, right? In fact, it's more than this. So if you go and search around, it's not just free trade agreements and also custom unions, but just to give you some context, okay? So agreeing partnership, right, or a free trade agreement, that's just the level one of your cooperation. Because you may want to cooperate in different areas, first and foremost, in terms of, let's say, your cultural exchange, right? You have schools that are doing student exchange, right? That's cultural level. You have economic level where we do trade. That's usually like the biggest reason, the biggest link, right, to make money. Financially wise, the finance route, right? If you have to cooperate, that will be like investing, right? Investing, also like in terms of buying the shares, right? Trading the financial assets, or like investing into other countries. Okay, so these are different ways to cooperate. So now, right, look at the different levels. So first one, we have a free trade agreement. Okay, so free trade agreement, this is where we have agreements, okay, or we call this treaties between two or more countries to reduce or eliminate trade barriers. Okay, so very straightforward, right? So here, simply, if let's say I'm country A, you're country B, right? I sign a free trade agreement with you. That means I'm not going to impose taxes. I'm not going to impose any of those trade restrictions on your country. So when we trade, it's like free trade, right? I think will be for all products. There may be some exceptions, right? For that few items, there could still be some restrictions, but mostly by and large, there will be no restrictions. So we're able to trade freely. So if our consumers, our people want to buy t-shirts from you, right, they will just buy freely. There's no taxes, there's nothing imposed. Okay, so that is the understanding. Apart from this, all right, apart from having this common agreement, right, it is also, this one is not written, let me just add in, it is also understood, right, that each country can pursue their own trade policies relative to other countries. Okay, so for example, we look at the case of this North American Free Trade Agreement. So we look at this example. So this is between US, Canada, and Mexico, right? They eliminated tariffs on many goods traded between these countries. So for these three places, they had this agreement, the NAFTA, right? NAFTA, this agreement. So first thing is within and amongst themselves, there is no trade restriction. Okay, so that's one. Second thing is when you are facing other countries, right? Let's say Singapore, China, Vietnam, right? So when these three countries, US, Canada, Mexico, when these three places, they are trading with other countries, each of them is free to impose their own restrictions on other countries. So for example, let's say US, right? It wants to implement tariffs on China. So it can still do that, okay? Because this level one cooperation, this agreement is only saying that between US, Canada, and Mexico, there will be no trade restrictions. But US is free to do other things, such as imposing tariffs on China. If Canada and Mexico don't like, so be it, right? They can choose not to implement tariffs on China, but they cannot stop US from doing this. So you are only agreeing to cooperate amongst yourselves, but to other countries, to other parties outside this agreement, each country is free to pursue their own trade policies. Whether you want to do free trade, whether you want to impose tariffs or whatever, you are free to do so. All right, so this agreement, this level one cooperation is not very restrictive. It's not very binding, right, on that any member country. So second level, we take our cooperation to a higher level. So first of all, amongst themselves, they have agreed to eliminate the trade restrictions. Okay, so every level here, right? If I look at level 2, right, customs union, then it is whatever included in level 1, which is FTAs plus something else. Okay, you follow, huh? So level 2, customs union, it is whatever level 1 has plus something else. So level 1 is to eliminate the trade barriers, the trade protectionism policies amongst the members. Okay, so within themselves, there's no restriction, right? So for customs union, we also have the same thing. Plus, there is a common external tariff on goods imported from outside the union. So right now, we take a more cooperative stance, right? We are stronger, or we are seen more tightly related as a group. So apart from having no restrictions amongst ourselves, we also take a common trade approach. So for example, if we want to tax China, if we want to tax Vietnam, then all of us will be taxing China and Vietnam. So it's not just, oh, maybe US wants to tax, but Canada and Mexico don't want, right? So there's no such thing here. So with a customs union, all the members will be doing the same thing to outside countries, right, or outsider countries. So for example, the European Union operates as a customs union, allowing free trade within the member states, and they have a common tariffs on goods from non-member countries. So if you don't belong here, then all the countries in the European Union will take a common approach towards other outsider countries. Okay, so that is a higher level of the cooperation. So this is the second level. All right, so you can feel free to look around. The next level, okay, the next level will be a common market. So we are looking at a further integration, things like having free flow of your resources. So that means, let's say for example, country A, the people, the workers, they want to work in country B. All right, let's say we like country B's work hours. We like country B's working culture. So instead of working in our own country, country A, we can work in country B, right? So then we can go forth to country B freely. There may be no need for a passport. You can just go over using your IC identity card, and then very freely can go over. All right, or even if you're using your passport, right, it's almost like free entry, free exit. Okay, so you can go over freely. The people are free to work wherever they are, right, without much restrictions. So that is a third level of your cooperation. We call this a common market. Okay, so apart from whatever level 2 offers, you also allow free flow of capital goods, resources, and labor within your own countries. Okay, so that is the third level. The fourth level here is a monetary union. That is the highest level. You have the case where all the countries are adopting the same currency. Then, right, you have, so there will be no central bank in each country per se, right? Because you don't have your own currency. So let's say, for example, country A, country B, country C, and D, they all have a monetary union, right? So they all form a monetary union. So let's say now their common currency is called the dollar, for example. So all four countries will use the same currency. So they are so integrated that their currency, their money is the same. So there's a common central bank, the organization that will print the money for them, and all four of them will be using the same money. So not like let's say Singapore has Sing dollar, Malaysia has the ringgit, right? Not like that. So these four countries, they have the same currency. So they are very integrated to the point where they share the same currency. So looking at this, right, let's say as an international business, so you are thinking of expanding, then you may want to consider whether your country has such agreements with other countries, right? Let's say within the ASEAN context, right, within the ASEAN nations, the Southeast Asian countries, right, like Singapore. So one common thing is, let's say in Singapore's case, if you go over to countries like Malaysia, some of you may be familiar with Malaysia, right? If you happen to be visiting there as well. So from Singapore to Malaysia, if you hold, let's say, the Singapore passport, right, you are able to use the electronic gate. So that means it's like how we enter and exit Singapore borders, right? Holding a Singapore passport. We don't have to go to the manual counter, right, where they have to check in the system, and then more slowly they have to stamp the passport and so on. So we use the gate. The gate will assess the system. They will see whether this person using the passport, they are the same person, and then they will just let you through, right? So it's very fast. Now in Malaysia's context, right, Malaysia is also offering the same thing to Singapore passport. So it also allows us to enter very quickly. So that is one way that the cooperation has come about. Then let's say in Thailand, let's say in Singapore, if you are a customer of the UOB bank, right? You may realize that now they also offer this. I'm not sure the name. I think it's like Pay Prompt or something. So you can actually do a fast funds transfer, right, to a bank account in Thailand. Okay, so this service is typically offered within the same country, right? So then there will be no cost associated. It wouldn't be take so long, right? So it's free, it's very fast. If I transfer, let's say, a sum of money from my number to a Singapore number, right? So I transfer whatever amount. So that is very fast and doesn't cost a single cent for the transaction. But now they offer the same thing, right? Let's say for UOB Bank, they can transfer between a Thailand UOB account and then also a Thailand Singapore account. So in that case, right, it will also lower the cost and it will also reduce the time spent to process this transaction. Right? Otherwise, if you are using PayPal, for example, you have to deposit your money in PayPal, they have to send over to the other party, and if the other party wants to withdraw the cash, the whole thing takes a few days. And also when you transfer, when they receive and they convert, there will also be exchange rate incurred, right? And on top of that, there will be additional fees when they withdraw. So it's going to cost some money, it's going to take a longer time. But now with all this in place, it makes it faster, it makes it cheaper for the firms to operate, let's say from an ASEAN country to other ASEAN countries because of all these services provided. So then we may want to consider this because these countries, they are nearby, right? They have integrated more, let's say with Singapore, and it offers the businesses, right, lower cost, faster processing, and the markets itself may also be similar, right? In terms of the culture, in terms of the weather, right? Like now in Singapore, it's very hot nowadays, right? Every day is hot. So then we expect the same weather in Malaysia, right? Because it's just our next door neighbor. Then let's say to some extent, right, the weather in Bangkok, Thailand will also be about the same. It's usually sunny throughout. So in that case, all these are very convenient. It will make it easier for the business to actually consider these nearby neighboring countries. So these are some of the points, right? These are the content for free trade agreement and also with your customs union. Okay, so this one, feel free to take a look, right? If it suits your essay, right, your report, feel free to add this in as well. Now, moving on, next part, right? Arguments for and against the free trade. Okay, so why are we fighting for free trade and why are we fighting against the free trade? So let me just underline this one and this one. Okay, so let's say some reasons, right? For free trade, we want efficiency. Okay, so based on the theory of comparative advantage, right? If you recall, saying that each country that should specialize in producing something that they can produce at the lowest opportunity cost. That means if I am better at producing t-shirts, I should do so and not produce wine, shoes, iPhones, etc. So I should just focus on t-shirts and I will be able to produce more at a lower cost, and that will allow the production to be higher, and we all do the same between all the countries and we trade what we have, right? So that it will lead to the best situation for everyone, whether you're a firm or a consumer. That's one argument. Second thing will be increased competition. If we allow free trade, that means we're allowing foreign firms to come in and sell to us, and that will lead to innovation. So why is it that companies like Samsung, iPhone, they are constantly launching new products? Right, like let's say Samsung, every year you have a new S series, a Note series. iPhone, we used to have the iPhone, then you have a Pro, you have a Plus, and then if I'm not wrong, you have an SE version that's cheaper. So why do all this? Why have new functions, new developments in your products every year? Why not just stay the same, right? And then just sell iPhone 3 every year, day in, day out. Because with competition, right, it becomes harder to stay relevant. So if I'm not constantly innovating and producing, people will forget about my brand. People will choose to buy something else that is seen, that seems to be better. And so with that, it is encouraging the firms to keep outdoing themselves, keep outdoing the competitors so that they stay on top. And consumers benefit because then we have a larger variety. The prices may also drop, right? Depending on the situation, of course. But by and large, with more competition, the firms cannot price too high, right? Today, if the iPhones are charging $4,000, right, probably wouldn't buy. because with that high price, we can go and buy, let's say Samsung. We can also choose to just go for something more budget, right? Let's say Xiaomi. So then there's no need to get a $4,000 phone, right? Unless we are really diehard fans. Okay, so more options, lower prices. Then consumers, as we said just now, right? A broader range of products and lower prices. Okay, so all these are the reasons that will fight for free trade. Why are we going against free trade? Right? So why impose all these trade protectionism measures, things like protecting your domestic jobs, right? So if the firms are able to compete with the foreign firms, that's a good thing, right? We are competitive. But if your local firms are unable to, right, then how? So nowadays, let's say I'm country A. Around the world, right, what are the leading mobile brands? We have Samsung, we have Apple, right? They should have the highest market share. Let's say from the Chinese firms, we have like Huawei, we have what else? Yeah, Xiaomi, right? So all these are some of the brands. And of course they position themselves differently. Some are more at the premium level. They charge thousands of dollars for the phones. Some are more affordable mass market. So it's like hundreds of dollars for maybe even like the same functions, right? Just that the branding is different. So then let's say now I am country A, right? You haven't heard of me before, and I have a new smartphone firm, right? We start a new smartphone firm, and we want to also offer our services, our products to the world. In that case, very hard to compete, right? Because people are already buying from these other existing firms. Why should they buy from me? Why should they buy from my firm? So it's very hard to compete unless, right? Let's say you contrast, unless now the government, let's say my country A, the government restricts foreign products. So everyone can only buy from my firm, right? They cannot buy from Samsung, they cannot buy from Apple, whatever, right? Only buy from my firm because mine is the only smartphone firm in country A. So of course I will have production going on, I will have factories set up because now I have customers, right? The local people can only buy from me. So of course they are my customers, right? Even though they're unwilling. So now if we open up the market, I'll lose my job because there's no one to buy from me anymore, right? So now here the same argument for the domestic jobs, there will be losses because the firms that cannot compete with the foreign firms, they may have to close, they may have to fire the people. All right, so that's a harsh reality, right? So because higher competition, those who cannot stay, they will be eliminated. Okay, so that's one. Next thing is the infant industry argument. This is what we mentioned just now, right? Like the developing industries, they're still young, they are still starting to develop. So if the foreign firms that are more established come in, they can more easily actually outdo our firms and end up this industry may actually have to close down. Okay, then national security, we also mentioned earlier, right? So this is about the same thing. So here we may need to, all right, so here we may need to actually remember some of the points, all right? The question may ask us one part about free trade. Okay, so apart from linking to the international business, asking you to think from their perspective, the first part of the question can ask you, right, explain why some countries pursue free trade. Or they can ask you, explain why some countries do not want to pursue free trade, right? Or they want to impose protectionism measures. So you will need to give some reasons yourself, right? Then after the second part of the essay, for example, may ask you, right? This is company A, B, C, or let's say this is McDonald's, and then this is the situation. Explain why, blah, 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 or discuss why, blah, blah, blah. All right, so this may be part of the essay, or MCQ may also ask you like, okay, so which one is a reason for free trade? Which one is an argument against free trade? So we need to be familiar as well. Okay, so let me move on here. All right, so here we'll make the link, right, to the global businesses. So it says that international businesses can build the strategies on the principles of comparative and absolute advantage. So they can, okay, give me a while. Okay, no worries, no worries. If you guys need any attendance help, just key in your name and then I'll just edit from there later on. All right, no worries. Okay, so let me move on. So this MNC may establish the manufacturing plants in countries with low cost labor focusing the research in countries with a comparative advantage in technology and innovation. So you can see the example of Apple. So Apple here, within the context of just one company, you can already see this example. So it doesn't have to involve a big country or like many firms. Even one company itself, you can see this. So they will produce in countries like China. If I'm not wrong, the producer is called Foxconn, right? If I'm not wrong. And of course, if you talk about the less ethical aspect, right, as we saw in the video last week, they were extracting the materials, I think cobalt or something, using the South African kids, right, the African kids. So that is also part of like a global supply chain, right? So then all these, they will choose the cheapest. That is for production. Then in terms of technology, because that could be the function, right? The department that leads to better products so that people will buy from Apple, and that could lead to higher revenue, higher sales. So in terms of technology and development, research and development, we need those with the expertise. So they could do it in-house. They may guard their secrets, their invention, their technology carefully. So they will do it with the scientists, whichever engineers, right, from their own country. So then you see the example where Apple design and develop products, let's say in the US, produce the products in like China. They get the natural resources from like Africa, right? So this is the example where comparative and then also the absolute advantage, they are put into place. Okay. Next portion, free trade opens opportunities. International businesses should consider the challenges of protectionism, right? Things like diversifying the supplier base, investing in automation, strategically locating operations to benefit from free trade and protectionist regions, right? This one again, if you want to link to an example, you can say the case of the US-China trade war, right? So all these examples, I gave it to you guys earlier on, right? Just that now we put it into the words, right? So apart from shifting your production, right? And then also shifting back to your own country, some companies, they may also want to shift closer to specific regions, right? Like, let's say if I were to produce in Singapore, okay, like let's say the case of Dyson, right? So they shift over the headquarters to Singapore because they want to tap into the talents. So here known as an education hub, right? And the people's incomes are generally higher than the neighboring Southeast Asian countries. So if we produce here, when we sell to the Singaporean consumers, they will be better able to afford these products, right? Because the hairdryer is like $500, the fan is like, I can't remember, $900 and above, right? So it's more expensive. You can get a fan for like less than 100. Why should you get the bladeless one from Dyson, right? Only if you have the money that you consider. So then in those cases, it could be a strategic move to come to Singapore. Okay, and from here, of course, we can trade with the other countries. Now that you have a presence in, let's say, Singapore, right? You're producing from here, you're developing from here to access other markets, right? Such as Malaysia, Thailand, or even to go to, let's say, Hong Kong. All these will be nearer, right? Compared to if you're just operating in the UK, then of course it's further away, right? Geographically. So to come into the Asian market, to come into the Southeast Asian market, they made the choice to come in here. Okay, then let's say in this case, we gave the example of Samsung, right? Samsung operating the production facilities across the globe, but maintaining flexibility in shifting operations between regions depending on the trade conditions, the labor cost, and the market access. So one thing to note is usually they talk about flexibility, right? Because there could be a lot of changes. Let's say you're operating in just your own country and you're getting suppliers from your own country as well. That makes the whole model much simpler because you don't have to deal with global events. You don't have to know or be familiar with what the foreign governments are doing. You don't even need to know about like exchange rate fluctuations and so on. But now, if you are venturing overseas, we are producing here, we are doing the innovation in another country, we are selling to different other countries. It's very intertwined, right? You are affected by many things. Like during COVID, right? Like you see the case with COVID. During COVID, let's say Singapore, right? We had to go as far as Mexico to buy eggs, okay, as our minister said. So that is to diversify our supplier base because we didn't want to just focus on that few in case they didn't sell to us. Countries like Malaysia, they imposed certain restrictions on, I think it was chicken meat or something, because at that time, they didn't have enough to sell. Okay, because you had lockdown measures, people were not working, right, as much, they were all at homes. So we have like a basic necessity like meat. It wasn't in abundance, the supply wasn't as high as before. So they had to implement things like export restrictions. So that means if you are just buying meat from Malaysia, and now they have cut down on how much they can sell to us, that puts us in jeopardy. So the flexibility here is very important for international business. Okay, so they may need to adjust the production, they may need to adjust the operations, right? They may need to pull out of the country in some situations. If you know the brand Borders, right? Borders is a bookstore. Okay, it was in Singapore about, I remember I was in high school about some years ago, okay, and it was located in Orchard. Right? If you are familiar with Wheelock Place in Orchard, right? I think it's opposite the Takashimaya or something. So they had a branch there and they were selling books. So it's a prime location. The rental is more expensive. The books, of course, are more expensive as well, right? And they also have a nice cafe. I remember like one bowl of soup cost like $7, $8, right? And like, wow, so expensive. And at that time I was just a high school student. So put in inflation now probably cost like $10, $11, right? For that bowl of soup. At that time, Borders had a presence in Singapore, right? I think also apart from like operating in other countries. Then eventually it pulled out, right? So you can't find Borders here in Singapore anymore, right? There's no shop here anymore. Then we ask ourselves why. So it could be that one reason because people's tastes and preferences change, right? People don't buy physical hard copy books as much as before. Okay, so sadly, it's more about ebooks, right? Or even like let's say now, not just about reading itself, right? But looking at a broader scale. Okay, yes, question. Give me a while. Let me raise the volume first. Okay.
All right. What products are they selling? And where are they selling
Where?
on balancing free trade with protectionist concerns?
Okay, wait, let me just clarify. So Borders, what was it selling? Where was it selling? And linking to free trade and protectionism, right?
Yeah, what are they selling?
Okay, can. All right. Okay, let me adjust. Okay, let me search. Okay, because whatever I tell you is based on what I know. Let me see if there's anything I may have missed out. This one. Okay, so if we go back, trace back to the history, even like, okay, let's say around 2010, right? That was about 14 years ago. So it had many stores in US. So probably, I think it could have started from US. Okay, yeah. Okay, so around US lah. So this is a bookstore. Okay, it's a bookstore. But nowadays, bookstore, they can't just sell books. Okay, otherwise you may not be able to sustain. Like if you know Kinokuniya, right? Kinokuniya, the Japanese bookstore. This one also, I'm not exactly sure, right? But if I'm not wrong, some of the stores also closed down. Because if you're just selling books itself, nowadays people may not read as much, right? Because you have social media, you can do a lot of things, right? Why sit down, spend 3 hours, 4 hours to finish a book? So they don't have the patience for that. So, okay, so that's one. Then ebook, of course, replaces the hard copy, right? Just get the tablet, just get a Kindle, you can read tons of books. You don't have to buy so many books that clutter up your whole bookshelf. About 10 plus years ago, right? Borders was still here, and you guys can see that. Okay, never mind. Let me just go back. You can see that here, they have actually closed already. Okay, never mind. Where is it now? Okay, let me find. Store Singapore. Okay, so yes, correct. It's by America, 1997. It opened at Wheelock Place, as we were saying just now. And then they were bought over. They opened a new outlet. Okay, this one don't have already. Okay, this was at 2013 now, so now don't have already. All right, so they closed in 2011. Okay, so you can see that it closed very early, right? So this is an example of international business. You got phased out by the high prices, by the products that became less popular. Even though like there's no other restrictions or anything, right? But to talk about flexibility because here it no longer is viable. So they agreed to this uh, takeover, right? So they got acquired by Popular. Popular Holdings, it also operates a bookstore. If you guys are familiar with Popular Bookstore, right? If you walk around the Singapore shopping malls in Singapore, you'll find them. This company it's considered international. So the thing is that why it's still operating, right, is that it's apart from selling books, Popular also sells these assessment books. So like people like to prepare for exams, the students and so on. They wouldn't close down because people will want to buy these extra practice questions from the Popular store. So that's why the business has been quite constant. Okay, so I think I answered your question. All right, so that was just about flexibility lah. Okay, so like you recognize that sometimes things don't go so well and they had to close down, right? About one and a half decade ago. Okay, next part. Ethics, economic systems affecting the global operations. Okay, so we talk about the capitalist, talk about like free market economy previously, right? And we also contrasted this with the command economy, where the government will dictate like what to produce, how much to produce, who will consume whatever products. So it says here that generally, if you are in a more free market environment, the firms will enjoy more autonomy. Whereas in the case of, let's say, in the command economy, right, there will be less autonomy. Then, of course, in the middle, if you guys remember, we have a mixed economy. This is where for some products, there are regulations, some products they don't have. So in that case, let's say we talk about this, let's say for alcohol, for cigarettes, these products are considered as harmful to the people, and not just to the people who consume. If I smoke next to you, right, I'm also damaging your health, right? Secondhand smoking. If I drink alcohol, I'm also endangering the lives of other people on the roads because if I'm a driver, I may knock over them. Right? So it's not just simply the consumers being affected, it's also other people. So the government will tax these products. So if I'm producing these items, right, then I'll be subjected to the taxes under this situation, right, where it's a mixed economy, the government actually intervenes. But if I'm selling things like iPhones, selling like T-shirts, probably there wouldn't be much intervention by the government. So I just sell freely. So there is this distinction between the economic systems as well. Okay, so you can see here, for example, companies operating in China, they need to align the strategies with the government regulations and policies, right? Requiring the partnerships with local firms. So if I'm not wrong, also some years back, there was this example. Okay, so just now we talk about the private education, right? So private education here, if you know, it goes by another name called tuition. So what happens is, let's say as a elementary, right, or we call this primary school, secondary school, and high school, right? The people studying in these public schools, right, the students from very young to like the teenagers, right, this profile, the parents and themselves as well, they will want to do well. So they will want to have extra practice, extra lessons outside of school. And sometimes, of course, we don't pay attention in class, right? Because it's too noisy, too rowdy, too crowded, and the teacher is just too boring. So we engage a tutor, right, separately to teach us the same concepts, to provide us with extra practices. So this is a common thing, right? I would say, especially in the Asian context. If you look at Singapore, right, there's a thriving industry. If you look at like South Korea, right, they are crazily right doing this. Hong Kong as well. Then countries like China as well. Okay, all the usually the Asian context lah. Okay, so within Singapore lingo, they call this kiasu. You don't want to lose out. So then you want to outdo your friends. So we go for tuition classes. Some like go for every subject you have a specific tutor, right, teaching you. So then, in that case, usually the government doesn't intervene much, right? But if you look at the case of China, a few years back, I think they said that this is no longer allowed, right? So some of the big firms, right, even listed companies offering such services, they could no longer operate or they could no longer make profits, right? If I'm not wrong, some of you may be more familiar. Overnight, or let's say over a short period of time, in terms of the businesses, it really shrunk a lot. So previously, you could be charging, let's say, $500 per month per subject per student. And then now, because the government say you cannot be profiting off education, the prices may have to reduce or you may have to shut down. So suddenly your business is affected. But let's say, so this one you can actually go and check. Okay, this happened in China. But let's say now if you were to relocate to another country like Singapore, right, it could still be very popular because here we are always have a high demand for such services. Or let's say if you go to South Korea, Hong Kong, right, all these are quite popular as well. Okay, so just giving example of this case. Okay, so the last few portions, this one just to wrap up whatever we have, saying that looking at the trade, right, whether first of all, when you're entering this or when you're considering this country, what trade policies or what stance, right, what position do they take against your country? Okay, so let's say from the ASEAN, using that as an example, if we operate in ASEAN and because of this cooperation, right, with the agreement with other ASEAN countries, ASEAN referring to like the Southeast Asian nations, okay? So it will be easier because it's nearby and we have a closer cooperation. So if you want to, let's say, start in Singapore and venture out to Malaysia, to Thailand, it's probably going to be easier, right? Because the systems are in place, the software and all that, they are constantly being updated. Okay, that could be beneficial. Right? But in the case where, let's say, the country imposes a trade restriction on us, right? They don't want us to trade as much. They don't want us to sell as much to them. Then it's going to be more difficult. So that would be the different considerations. Then the other thing, of course, is to add this further, apart from, let's say, just the free trade agreement, right? Do we have other higher levels of agreement? Let's say the custom union, just now we talk about the common market, monetary union. So if it's a single currency, all the countries in that union, they are using the same currency, it could also facilitate the whole business transaction. Imagine today, for example, in Singapore, we use the Sing dollar. And hypothetically, let's just imagine that Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, right, all use the Sing dollar. If you want to access these markets, it becomes even easier because the people can move freely about. And let's say now I operate in Singapore, in order to go to these countries, right, I don't even need a passport. They could build the land transport as well. I can take a train from Singapore to Vietnam, maybe it spends about 3 hours. That's about it. Or let's say if I want to do transactions, there wouldn't be any foreign exchange because it's all the same Sing dollar, for example. So it makes it much easier if, let's say, the countries are very much in a close cooperation. And then once you access one of them, you are getting access to all of them, right? So this make it easier for the business as well. Okay, of course, conversely, again, if you look at countries that are against each other, right, it prompts you to relocate, it causes you to like shift to other countries, etc. So some of the points that we mentioned here. Okay, all right. So that's all then. Have a good day. Bye bye.